as many of you guys know, I have been working very hard and very diligently on volume 2. And this is one part of the study that I'm wanting to share with you guys because it is key to latter-day salvation for all of dispersed Israel, latter salvation for Judah, latter salvation, even believe it or not, for Christians. I had some comments last week about the fact that in my study and in my teaching, I address both Jews and Christians. When you look at the history of Israel, when you look at the Tanakh about Israel being dispersed into all lands, you find that Jacob's descendants have been filtered through all of the world's religions. You have Jacob's descendants are in Judaism, they are in Christianity. Some of them have fallen to Buddhism, Hinduism. They are really, and then many of them, of course, today, the biggest growing religion and the fastest growing religion today is atheism, which, yes, atheism is a religion. It's a religion that there is no God, but it still has its own beliefs and its own systems. So, what I am looking at is the biblical view from Scripture. What can we glean from past history? What can we glean from the words of the prophets, especially from Torah, that will enlighten our way today and make a change? In the study today, I'm going to show you how we have been repeating history. We are like a broken record that is stuck in a very, very discorded part of a song, playing the same wretched tune over and over and over again for 2,000 years. We are a people that are so addicted, so we hold on so tightly to our own ways and our own doings, and we think that we are so enlightened. But all those ways of enlightens, the things that we do, every few generations, it leads to destruction, as we will see today. So my question to you today is going to be, at what point in time are we willing to let go of us, willing to let go of the safety in numbers, the security of our own people, and say, let God? Throughout history, we have tried every single way under the sun. But there is one way we have failed to sanctify, one way we have yet failed to try, and that is just really this really simple way that Jehovah has given to us in the Torah. A way that, believe it or not, in many respects parallels the United States Constitution in its ideas of justice, in its ideas of a court system, the idea that you should not take the law into your own hands, but rather you should take it to a civil court, and that there are standardized laws that apply to everyone, whether rich or poor, whether wealthy or a person of nobility or a poor peasant. Everybody has the same right to justice under the law. You find that these were the foundations of all Western societies in the, not so much in Europe, but really Europe came to learn from America, from the system of justice that America had. You have Tocqueville and Freedom in America, who have all these ideas that disseminated because of the righteous example that America once established. But you find that, like any generations, you forsake the way. America is only one story. We're going to learn about the stories today that predate modern history. And again, this broken record that plays over and over and over again. About every probably 5 to 6 generations, you find this discordant melody erupts into a very violent conflict. Elie Wiesel, the very famous Nobel Prize winner and Holocaust survivor, he said that he concluded that the endurance of anti-Semitism remains a mystery. He described anti-Semitism as an irrational disease. The unsolvable puzzle, he said, is that the world has changed in the last 2,000 years, and only anti-Semitism has remained. The only disease that has not found its cure is anti-Semitism. And he is absolutely right. You look in both America as well as in Europe, anti-Semitism is on a rise. You find that crimes against Jews are continually rise. And I will say this, that Jews as a people are those are the ones that are singled out, but it often spills over to any of those that observe a Mosaic code. Just to give you a little bit of an example, most of the people, I live in the south of the United States, and while I do not have a Jewish lineage, everybody around us identifies me and my family as Jews. We don't follow the traditional, Judeo-Christian um, lifestyle that you have. We observe kashrut, we observe Shabbat, we follow the Mosaic laws. So to everyone else around us, we are Jews. As a matter of fact, the kids in my son's class have even made jokes, very anti Semitic jokes, about Jews to my son, because that is how they identify us. Because if you're not in the traditional Christian mold, well, then you have to be Jewish. So many of these times of persecution occur. Mainly you see it within Judaism, within anti-Semitism, but you also see that it spreads to the righteous, to many of the people who love the ways of God, who try to walk in his ways. So the question that I want to look today is, why is it that the people who claim to cleave to a covenant, the people who claim to love Yahweh, to walk in his ways, why is it that we see throughout history that these people are so often targeted, that these people are so often made example of, when they are the ones that both verbally and in action try to stand up for the way of God, for righteousness and justice more than all the other people? Now, you find that Eli Wetzel's words are really echoed in Lamentations. This idea that the only disease that has not been conquered in the last 2,000 years is anti-Semitism. Lamentations 2:14 states, "Your prophets have seen in vain and foolish things for you, for they have not discovered your iniquity to turn away your captivity, but they have seen in all these false burdens and false causes for your banishment." So the idea that you find is that what the author of Lamentations is telling us is that for 2,000 years, people have given excuses. They have offered vain reasons, vain justifications for the persecution of God's people. If you will recall, in Deuteronomy 28:38, one of the curses of the law, I'm sorry, this is Deuteronomy 28:37, one of the curses of the law that God gave. He says, if you breach in my covenant, if you will not walk in my ways, he said, you will become an astonishment, a proverb, and a byword among all nations where I shall lead you. You find that this is very much true today. This idea of a people that are hated. They're hated because their ways are different. They are hated because some of the things that they believe are different than the world. And we're going to look at why that still occurs today. And we're also going to look at this idea of this curse, a very specific curse that the nations of the earth have drunk, and it's made them drunk in their own ways. You find that within Yahweh's covenant, when we look at Israel's history, God was very, very merciful with Israel. He gave Israel three different eras. Each of these eras lasted for about 430 years. So he gave Israel 430 years, three different times. This is like almost 1,700 years to sanctify his way and to walk in it. The first chance he gave them was during the Judges period, to walk in the way of Yahweh. At the end of this, they rebelled. They wanted a king, and they wanted to become like all the nations of the earth. Yahweh obliged. He gave them a king. Once again, he gave them about 430 years to sanctify his way and to walk in it. They rebelled again. They followed the nations of the earth. They refused the waters of Shiloh that go softly, and they walked in their own ways. They are deported. The merciful sentence at that time was not Holocaust. It was not this all-out slaughter of Yahweh's people, but like Adam and Eve, it was exile into foreign lands to be sifted among the nations. You find those texts in Amos. So with this, you find that God, in his mercy, gives Israel a third chance. And this third chance is the most abandoned study, it is the most overlooked era of Israel's history. And that is this era of the Second Temple period, when God gave Israel a third and final chance to sanctify him and to walk in his ways. And it was this point in Israel's history that had the most crucial actions that have affected us for the past 2,000 years. And the reason why persecution among Jews and Christians occurs to this day. You find that one of the things that Israel had this really nasty habit of doing was loving her own judgments and her own ways more than the way of Yahweh. In every generation, she would compromise and she would mingle God's law, the written Torah, with that of the teachings that she would be influenced by in other nations. You find that when Israel comes back during the Second Temple period, the first waves of persecutions begin to spring up. The first account that we have is in Esther. That Holocaust is averted, but very, very narrowly. And you find that these Holocaust and this persecution begins again. So the first question that we really have to ask in a study of the law, to study why there is persecution, why is there this hatred of God's people, is really what Scripture shows us with these early generations that came back to the land. And the reason I am again coming back to this study, I dealt with it a lot last week, and I'm coming back to it again because it is this history, it is the testimony in this that answers questions today where we can avert the hate, we can avert so many of the persecutions if we will but do four things that we are going to see at the end of this study today. So when Israel came back to the Holy Land, right around 550 BCE, or actually it was closer to 539 BCE, they were given a third and final chance to sanctify Yahweh and to walk in his covenants. But did they? Did they seek to Yahweh? Did they choose a way of righteousness? Or did they choose to walk in the ways of their forefathers who had taught them to sin? We're going to be looking at some text. Again, I am going to be going through through some of this rather quickly. I hope that you guys will come back to it. All I'm really doing today is laying the groundwork. Please study for yourselves. Don't just take my word for it. Study and pray for yourselves. Look at the text and see where the evidence leads. One of the first things that we have is that when Israel returned to the promised land, one of the first thing that they did was they recovenanted with Yahweh. And Nehemiah 9:38 says, we make a sure covenant and we write it, both our princes, the Levites, and the priests, and we seal to it. So this is very, very important for Israel's history in that uh, Israel, just like Moses at Mount Sinai or in the plains of Moab, just like Israel under the monarchy, they made a pledge to recovenant with Yahweh during the Second Temple period. They had committed to both the blessings and the curses, the blessings when they obeyed, the curses when they disobeyed. So Israel was very much under the entire covenant during the Second Temple period. God had not changed anything from the Judges era, from the First Temple period to the Second Temple period. I don't know about you guys, but I know throughout history of my time studying the Bible, I had always seen the Second Temple period as something that was more modern, as something that somehow worked a little bit differently than what it had in the past. And I am learning to challenge these notions and to challenge these beliefs. So, what do Nehemiah and Ezra tell us regarding Israel's first 70 years on the Promised Land? This is Ezra's testimony. This is Ezra 9, verses 1 and 2. It says, Now when these things were done, the princes came to me, saying, The people of Israel, the priests, the Levites, have not separated themselves from the people of the lands according to their abominations, even that of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, Jebusites, and Ammonites, Moabites, Egyptians, and Amorites. For they have taken their daughters for themselves for sons, so that the holy seed is mingled among themselves, among the people of the land, and the princes and rulers have been chief in this trespass. So you find very early the people began to forsake Jehovah's covenant. So why was not marrying with the strangers of the land so important? It really had more than anything to come down to politics. When your children had intermarried the people of the land, you would not seek your own well-being. You would not seek the ways and laws of your people, but you would commingle that because you had to please all the people in the land. Ezra 9:10 says, And now, O Jehovah God, what shall we say? For we have forsaken your commandments. This is a very, very tough acknowledgement. Um, Nehemiah 13:15 says, In those days I saw some in Judah treading the wine presses on the Sabbath. In other words, they were working, physically working in their occupation on the Sabbath. They were bringing in sheaves, they were lading asses, and they were bringing their burdens into Jerusalem to sell on the Sabbath day. And I testified against them. You find there were also foreigners from Tyre that came in, and they also sold their victuals on the Sabbath day. And then again, Nehemiah comes back in chapter 13, saying that they had intermarried with the nations of the earth. This is Nehemiah 13, verses 23 through 24. And that Israel was beginning to lose its national identity very early in this time period. They were losing their national identity and that they were losing their language. You find by the time 200 BCE rolls around, Aramaic has really displaced Hebrew as a national language within Israel. So this is just eroding of national sovereignty, eroding of the nation's ability to walk in the Mosaic code, a Mosaic code that held to such precepts as innocent until proven guilty, where you had to have 2 to 3 witnesses for a conviction to hold water, for there to be evidence submitted, and rather than people going out and having mob and mass riots and taking the laws into their own hands, they would peacefully seek justice through a court of law that did not show preference to religious party, it did not show preference to political party, but rather it sought to seek justice based on the individual merits of a case. These were the ways that Israel was beginning to forsake. And what we find is that history repeats itself over and over and over again. What Israel did during Nehemiah's days, they did in the ongoing temple period, they did throughout the Greek and Hellenistic Roman period, and they did for the past 2,000 years. And this again brings us back to that echo of Lamentations 2:14. Your prophets have seen a vain and foolish thing for you. They have not discovered your iniquity, to turn away your captivity, to turn away your persecutions, but have seen false causes for the reasons of your punishment. Zephaniah 3:5 makes a very important observation. Zephaniah says, For Jehovah is just in the midst thereof. He will not do iniquity. Every morning he brings his judgments to light. He fails not. But the unjust know no shame. So, what I would like to do in this study is bring forth some of those judgments to light. Um, and, this is at the dawn of a new day. We are sitting at a path where we have 2 directions. We are sitting where Western society can proceed in the way that it's going in abandoning a Judeo foundation for its system of governance. We can continue down that path, or we can put on the brakes and we can say, whoa, let's stop and let's return. So let's look at some of these judgments that we can bring to light that can help sanctify Yahweh and sanctify the judgments that he has done in Israel's history. And with this, I want to look at some portions of Isaiah and Ezekiel that are very, very overlooked. I think we don't study these because we don't see their relevance to our lives today. And two, because we think that this occurred during the first temple era and that Isaiah was just written, was just addressing the political conflict during the time that Assyria was assaulting the land. And what we find, however, when we look at the details of this, is something wholly different, something that really challenges a lot of our traditional understandings of Scripture. So, before I get into the actual subject material, I'm going to give you guys a homework assignment. This is something for you guys to do during the week, and that is to study Deuteronomy 31, Deuteronomy 32 with the Song of Moses, this judgment song. And then I would like for you to compare it with Isaiah's chapter 30 and 31. And then again, compare it with Ezekiel chapter 32. Now, I'm going to give you just a little bit of the structure for the way that these texts are written. First of all, you find that Deuteronomy chapter 31 gives the structure for the Song of Moses, but then you find chapter 32 is the actual song. You find that Isaiah does the exact same thing, and as a matter of fact, in Isaiah chapter 30, he paraphrases, as we will see, Deuteronomy 31. Then in Deuteronomy 32 is his actual song. Ezekiel does the same thing in Ezekiel chapter 32, where chapters 1 through 16 are kind of like this instruction, the structure of this, what the judgments that is going to take place during this horrific day of slaughter. But then you have verses 17 through 28, which are the actual judgment. So all of these verses really overlap. They parallel, they overlay Moses' song of judgment. Now, what's interesting in both Isaiah and Ezekiel is that they do not tell the horrific day of slaughter, this horrific judgment day, from the perspective of Israel, from the perspective of Jerusalem or the Holy Land. They tell of the judgment day from the perspective of the Jews and Israelites who have immigrated out of the Holy Land and they have sought the refuge of Egypt. So they tell this story from the perspective of the immigrants that are living in Egypt and the things that are occurring not only in Egypt, but also in Jerusalem. I mean, they are very much affected by the righteousness that is established both in Jerusalem on the Holy Land, as well as the righteousness and justice that they establish in their own communities. And that is what we are going to be looking at. Now, a couple of things I want to point out with the book of Isaiah is that when you read the book of Isaiah, and he uses a personal pronoun like I have done this, or he even says, I, Yahweh, will do this. Those are usually the times that the word that Isaiah himself is writing. With other times when the book of Isaiah refers to Isaiah as like a second person, such as in Isaiah 7, Isaiah 20, and Isaiah chapters 37 through 39, these are the words of his scribes, where they are really taking a dictation and they are writing in a second person the account that Isaiah gives them to write. And you find in Isaiah 8:2 that he says, I took unto me faithful witnesses to record Uriah the priest and Zechariah the son of Yeberechiah. So you find that understanding who is actually writing and that tone of voice does make a very large difference in how we understand Scripture. Um, the other thing that you find, as Isaiah tells us in Isaiah chapter 6, I'm sorry, Isaiah chapter 8, verses 16 and 20, is that Yahweh's prophets, they look to the written law for everything. And it is from there that they develop their theology and they develop their prophecies. So you find that Isaiah in chapter 30 builds on this concept of the day of Yahweh. And he describes this horrific day of slaughter. And again, this day of slaughter did not take place during the first temple period when the merciful sentence was banishment from the land. But it occurs in the second temple period where the remnant have returned, they have recovenanted, but yet for all that, yet for all Jehovah has done for them and all the chances they have given them, he has given them, they refuse to walk in his righteous statutes and judgments, and they once again forsake his covenant. Um, and what you find in, and I'm just going to start reading a little bit of Isaiah 30, chapter 1. I'm going to skip through this. I will try to recognize the verses that I am using. So I am beginning right now in Isaiah 30, chapter verse 1. It says, "Woe to the rebellious children, says Jehovah, that take counsel, but not by me, and that cover with a covering, but not by my spirit, for they will add sin to sin. They walk to go down to Egypt, and they have not asked at my mouth to strengthen themselves in the strength of Pharaoh and trust in the shadow of Egypt." So, what this political situation is that you find that whether we're looking at Assyria, Babylon, later Persia, and then even later Greece, and especially within the land of Israel, these nations throughout their history are usually pretty chaotic. There are ongoing invasions, every 70, 100 years, one nation falls, another arises. But in this rising and falling of nations, there's ongoing battles, there's ongoing wars that make life very unsure, that provide instability where you really don't know if your children will live in peace or chaos, whether they will be caught in war, whether they will be drafted into an army, and even fighting their own brethren as one group is drafted to one side and another group is drafted to another side. So, with this, Egypt was usually immune to this ongoing chaos. They were immune because they were separated, it was hard to access. So, Egypt usually offered a peace and a stability that other nations did not afford. So, even though you lived by Egyptian laws to some respect, you find that in the Second Temple period, Jews in the early stages were given the autonomy to live by their own laws, to live by the Mosaic code, and to walk in the way of Yahweh. But Isaiah continues on. He says, "Therefore shall the strength of Pharaoh be to your shame, and the trust in the shadow of Egypt shall be to your confusion." And I am going to skip down to verse 5. They were, they were all ashamed of a people that could not profit them, nor be of help, nor profit to them, but a shame and a reproach. And this kind of echoes again Deuteronomy 28, verse 37, where it says that Israel will become, this shame, this reproach, or byword in all nations that Yahweh has sent them. Now, this is where it gets interesting, is in Isaiah 30, verse 7. It says, "For the Egyptians shall help in vain and to no purpose. Wherefore I have cried concerning this, their strength is still. Now go and write this before them on a table and note it in a book, that it may be a witness for them for a time to come." And in most versions it says forever and ever because the word olam is used there. But in context, it is that it shall be a witness for the time to come. And the use of the word olam there is that this shall be a witness to them for a time that is a great time off. I mean, this time is so in the distance that it is like forever because it is so far removed from Isaiah's day. But Isaiah here, interestingly, is quoting from Deuteronomy 31:19. And this was Jehovah's instruction to Moses. It says, "Now therefore write you this song and teach it to the children of Israel and put it in their mouths, that this song may be a witness for me against them, against the children of Israel." So you find that Isaiah is paraphrasing the Song of Moses. He's writing this to the Jews, to the Israelites. I mean, it was what you find because Judah was closer to Egypt, more Jews resorted to Israel, but you find that Israelites from Ephraim very likely resorted to the safety of Egypt as well during both the First Temple period. And then we have numerous reports within the book of Maccabees, within Josephus, and even within Philo, of waves of Jewish immigration into Egypt because they would seek the safety and the security that Egypt had to offer. Isaiah writes concerning the Jews that have returned to Egypt for Egyptian protection in verse 9. This is a rebellious people, lying children, children that will not hear the law of Yahweh, which say to our seers, see not, and to the prophets, prophesy not unto us right things, speak smooth things, easy things to us, prophesy of us deceit. Get you out of the way and turn you aside of the path, cause the Holy One to cease from before us. So, what exactly does Isaiah have in mind? Who exactly is he referring to? Um, I am going to quote a few passages uh, from the books of Maccabees that really fulfill exactly what Isaiah is saying here. You find that during this time period, as early as 215 BCE, that there was a growing movement within Judaism that wanted to take the people of Judah out of the way. They wanted to forsake the covenant of Yahweh, and they wanted to walk by the laws and the ways of all nations. And by 221, this movement had grown to a significant degree, so much so that it fractured the high priesthood and even caused the high priest Onias to be cast out of the priesthood. But even before 170 BCE, you find this event occurring right around 217 during the administration of the high priest Simon the Just. And you find that, and I'm looking through my notes here, um, for for the exact text. Let's see here. I'm not finding the exact text. I'm going to come back to this. Okay, so this is what Josephus says. This is going to be, I'm sorry, the book of First Maccabees. This is Maccabees 1, 11 through 15. So this would have been speaking regarding right about 170 BCE. But as we're going to see, this we're going to come back to the subject of Egypt and see that this applies to Egypt as well. It says, at that time there appeared in the land of Israel a group of traitorous Jews who had no regard for the law and who had a bad influence upon many of our people. For they said, let us come to terms with the Gentiles. For our refusal to associate with them has brought us nothing but trouble. This proposal appealed to many people, and some of them became so enthusiastic about it that they went to the king and received from him permission to follow the Gentile customs. They had surgery performed to heighten their circumcision, and they abandoned the Holy Covenant. So these are some of the things that were occurring during this era. Now, coming back to the era of 217, in Egypt, you find that the first waves of persecution begin right at this time. And this persecution is a history that reads just like about 80 years ago in modern history. So the persecution began during the time of Philopator, which would have been right around 215 BCE. And this is what he did regarding this fracture within Judaism, where some of them wanted to follow the Torah and some of them wanted to abandon it. It says, and this again is going to be 3rd Maccabees 3 verse 30. Now, 3rd Maccabees is contested among scholarship. I do refer you to the works of Kasher, who has written Hellenization in Egypt, because he really provides a lot of scholarship on this era. And his conclusion is that 3rd Maccabees, the history of it and the substance of it stands as a legitimate history for Judah during this time. So this is what Philopater did, and this is again 3rd Maccabees chapter 3. It says he purposed to inflict a stigma on our race, and this is specifically referring to the Jews in Egypt. Wherefore he erected a pillar at the porch tower and caused the following inscription to be engraved on it: that entrance to their own temple was to be refused to all those who would not sacrifice, that all Jews were to be registered among the common people, that those who refused to be registered were to be forcibly seized and put into slavery, that those who were to be registered were to be marked on their person with an ivy leaf symbol of Dionysus, and were to be set apart within these limited rites. In order that he may not appear to be the enemy of all, he inscribed below, "But if any of you prefer to join those who have been initiated into the mysteries, they shall have equal citizenship with the Alexandrians." Now, I don't know about you guys, but this sounds eerily close to modern history. A horrific repeat of an ancient history. Again, it is this bad record that plays over and over and over again throughout history. And again, to echo Lamentations, prophets have seen a vain thing. Teachers, preachers, pastors, rabbis have not found the source of iniquity to avert this curse, to avert the things that continually to go on. These things continued to fracture the Jews in Egypt. And then you find that another decree is given. And this again it continues in 3rd Maccabees. As soon as this letter arrives, you are to send to us all those who love among you, together with your wives and children, with insulting and harsh treatment, bound securely with iron fetters, to suffer the sure and shameful death that befits enemies. But those who are to shelter any of the Jews, whether old people or young children or even infants, will be tortured to death with the most hateful torments, together with their families. Any who are willing to give information or receive of the property of those who incur punishment, and of course a bribe is given to them, from the royal treasury, and will be awarded freedom. Every place directed sheltering a Jew is to be made unapproachable and to be burned with fire and to become useless for all time, immortal. So you find that during this time, people are really persecuted. This is just a horrific time in history. But the question that I have is, was there a word of warning given? Did Israel's prophets give writing for the time to come that Israel may hear and that Israel may learn from these actions and not repeat it? What you find is that the testimony of Isaiah 30 very much describes the Second Temple period, where there's they despise a group despise the word of Yahweh, they recovenant, and you find there is this fluctuation between obedience to Torah and falling away from it. And we tend to, at least I know that so many times when I have read in the past, that anytime Isaiah talks about this time of salvation, this time where God is sanctified, we want to apply it blanketly to a latter day salvation where there is this triumph and righteousness prevails and Israel never again goes back. But that is actually not what you find in Isaiah 30 and 31. They recognize idols being put in the holy temple. Then they recognize Israel loathing those idols and cleansing the temple from them. And you find that they sanctify the way of Yahweh, and then they once again fall away. So it is again this fluctuation back and forth between righteousness and as to which culture will prevail. And you find that the biggest thing that marks this era is the slaughter that occurs. Jerusalem wax fat, they become wealthy. Her leaders really profit from the taxation of this period. And as Moses prophesied, Jeshurun kicks. When she becomes comfortable, she becomes complacent. She no longer sanctifies the way of Yahweh, and she turns from it. And as this back and flow occurs, it really just provokes all the nations of the earth to hatred. Rather than walking in one way, this division and this strife between religious factions only foments the hatred among the nations of the earth. Then Isaiah prophesies, this is going to be Isaiah 30, verse 25. And there shall be upon every mountain and upon every high hill rivers and streams of waters in that day of great slaughter when the towers fall. And then he talks about the light of the day being darkened. And again, I encourage you to compare this to Ezekiel 32, because you find that Ezekiel tells the exact same story. Their prophecies parallel to almost word for verbatim, word for word in so many respects. And then verse 27, behold, the name of Yahweh comes from afar, burning with anger, and the burden thereof is heavy. His lips are full of indignation as a tongue of devouring fire. And it goes on to describe this horrific sacrifice. And it says, verse 30, Yahweh will cause his glorious voice to be heard, and they shall show the lighting down of his arm with the indignation of his anger, and the flame of fire with his fire, and with scattering and tempest and hailstones. Now, there is a tendency among many apocryphal, Kabbalistic, New Testament, and a lot of different sects to use these verses to justify some sort of very apocalyptic type Holocaust where the earth is destroyed and where it's kind of netherworld. It's not necessarily in a historical context. And I think Isaiah really makes this clear that these are metaphors that are used for horrific world conflict, not that they are literally raining fire and brimstone for heaven. And Isaiah uses the statutes that Israel had established for itself to make this point. When we skip down to Isaiah 30, verse 33, Isaiah says, for Tophet is ordained of old. Yes, the king is prepared. He has made it deep and large, and the pile of there is fire and much wood. In other words, this is like a sacrifice that the king himself has prepared by his own iniquities, by his own doings. He has prepared this sacrifice. And then continuing, and here's where we have the metaphor. It says, the breath of Yahweh is like a stream of brimstone, it does kindle. So when the prophets talk about fire and brimstone, they're not talking about a literal brimstone, but they are talking about the breath of Yahweh, the spirit of Yahweh that moves on the hearts of men, that provokes them to do really bizarre things when they forsake the law. The law is really your strength. It keeps you from going astray, and it is what keeps you sane. When you depart from the law, you really depart from your sanity. Ezekiel echoes this in chapter 32, verses 9 and 10, where he says, I will vex the hearts of many people. Then I shall bring your destruction among the nations, into all countries where you have not known. Yes, I will make many people amazed at you. And again, this is the byword among the nations. And there the kings shall be horribly afraid of you. And I will brandish my sword against them, and they shall fall and tremble at every moment, every man for his own life in the day of your fall. Now, this again is quoting from Deuteronomy 28, verses right around verses 58 through 67, where your life will hang in doubt before you. Would that it, when it is night, would that it were morning, and at morning, would that it were not night. So you have this constant, horrific, turbulent time in world history. And notice both Ezekiel as well as Isaiah talk about this scattering. We have record after record after record of both Egypt, Syria, and later Rome deporting Israelites, deporting people from the promised land and deporting them to all the nations of the earth. So what occurs in the first temple period occurs again in the second temple period. But whereas in the first temple period, the merciful sentence is simply banishment, Jehovah applies that merciful sentence first, but to no correction. When people are banished to the areas of the earth, they carry with them the ways of their forefathers who taught them to sin in conjunction with the Torah. So again, it's this constant commingling that Israel was apt to do. There's an inscription that has been discovered at Dan, and it shows that Israel had this long history of commingling the worship of Yahweh with the worship of other gods. And the judgment against Israel that you find in chapter 30 is that as Israel loved her abominations, God is going to make them drink from that cup. But they're not going to be drink a little bit. They are going to be made to forsake the holy covenant. They're going to be made and forced to abandon the way of life that could have prospered them and drink of the ways of judgment and death that they have craved for so long. So what do you find in this period? You find that Torah observance is made illegal. Anyone who follows the Torah is persecuted. Anyone that follows Judaic teachings is run through. Again, as we saw in Egypt, they were registered. And then you find what happened in Egypt during this time was absolutely horrific, because we have the record of the first ever death camp where Philip gathers all the Jews out of the land, and he sends them to a hyperdome where they become a very public spectacle. People coming on the road can see them, they can mock and gawk at them. And he prepares this day of slaughter where the Jews are to be trampled by elephants. Now, Third Maccabees relates that by a miracle and through a prayer, the Jews are saved and they are delivered. But there is an atonement that is made. They're just not saved and delivered just because they prayed, but rather there's this atonement that is made where the Hellenizers, those that seek to cause Israel to depart from the way, are brother against brother. They kill each other, and they eliminate this faction that tries to lead them out of the way. And life and liberty is preserved for a time in Egypt until Rome comes into power. And then you find that the Hellenizers once again have gained a foothold. The Mosaic law within Egypt is fractured once again between those that want to follow Mosaic code and those that want to follow Hellenistic ideals. So you find this is a continual struggle. And this really, these reform movements that take Judah further and further away from the covenant continually lead to oppression at each and every step of the way. You also find that there was not just, and I know I keep rubbing my nose here. Actually, I'm going to turn my heater off. It's been pretty cold down here, but it's making my nose rather dry, so that it's itching. But what you find is that the curse that God pours out upon the nations at this time is not whereby people begin to hate any of those that observe the Mosaic law. This occurs not just by some random chance, but there is a specific curse that God pours out upon the nations. They imbibe it, and in their imbibing of it, it is a philosophy that unites all the nations against Israel. And this is anybody who loves Israel's law of justice. And this is why we see that not only Jews are persecuted, but Christians are also persecuted, because so many Christians also claim a Judaic Mosaic foundation to so many of their thoughts and beliefs. So this is the curse that makes the whole earth mourn, and this is found in First Maccabees chapter 1. It says, then the king wrote to his whole kingdom, and this is referring to Antiochus Epiphanes, that all should be one people, and that they should abandon their particular customs, all Gentiles conform to the commandment of the king, And many Israelites delighted in his religion, and they sacrificed to idols and they profaned the Sabbath. So you find this curse that is poured out to all nations is this idea of one world, one people. Um, and this is the hope of the Gentiles that keeps repeating in every generation. This idea that there are no Israelites, there are no Americans, there are no Jews, there are no Israelis, there are no Germans, there are no Britons or Africans, but rather we're just all one people. These ideas led to 5 separate holocausts from 170 to 170 BCE to 170 CE. And these are just the major ones. There were many, many more, too numerous for me to go over today. This persecution was later inherited by the Church of Rome, and it came to a head again in World War II, as all of these atrocities occurred yet again. Um, and what we find is that each step of the way, there is this refusal to sanctify the way of Yahweh. So at this point, I want to get into something. As you can tell, I am not afraid to touch off on some controversial ideals and some controversial topics. Um, and I think we really have to do this because if we look at our past and the things that for the past 2,000 years our teachers have taught us, the things that we are willing to examine, those have not led to a cure to this age-old disease of hatred of Yahweh's people. Um, you know, David asks in Psalms 2, why do the heathen hate? Why do they rage against Yahweh's people? And Yahweh has given us the answer, but it requires a very tough, gut-wrenching, honest look at ourselves and our history. So with that in mind, I'm going to look at one aspect in particular that Israel's prophets point out. In Zephaniah 3, verses 4 through 6, he says, her prophets are light and treacherous persons. Her priests have polluted the sanctuary. They have done violence to the law. The just Yahovah is in the midst thereof. He will not do iniquity. Every morning he brings his judgment to light. He fails not. But the unjust know no shame. So there's this idea that even when those who do violence to the law, even those who depart from the law, even when it's revealed, they want to deny it. Ezekiel 5, verses 5 through 8. Thus says Yahweh, this is Jerusalem. I have set it in the midst of all nations and all countries that are round about her. She has changed my judgments into wickedness more than any other nations, and my statutes more than countries that are round about her. For they have refused my judgments and my statutes, and they have not walked in them. Therefore, thus says Yahweh, because you are multiplied more than the nations round about you, and have not walked in my statutes, neither have kept my judgments, neither have you done according to the judgments, but you have done according to the judgments of the nations round about you. Therefore, thus says Yahweh, behold, I, even I, am against you, and I will execute judgments in the midst of you in the sight of all nations. And I will do to you such as which I have not done, and whereto I will not do any more of the like because of all of your abominations. And then skipping down to verse 6, again, this is a quote where Isaiah is quoting from Ezekiel. It says, I have cut off nations, and their towers are desolate. I have made their streets waste, and none that pass by. Their cities are destroyed, so that there is no man in them, and there is no inhabitant. So the idea is that God takes justice during this time of world judgment, where the mighty are brought low, and even the righteous who profess to adhere to the covenant, they too are caught up in this horrific Holocaust. So, what are the judgments? What are the statutes that may provoke Yahweh's anger? You find that Israel, with all good intentions, violated many of the statutes of the law. Deuteronomy 4:2, as well as Deuteronomy 12:32, commanded that Israel should not add or delete from the statutes that Yahweh had commanded. But you find that in the Second Temple period, um, there was this tendency to, in order to withstand all these factions drawing Israel away from the law, all these factions trying to get Israel to abandon um, the covenant, that they put in place teachings to strengthen their law, to strengthen their adherence. And these are just a few. I'm only going to touch on about 5 of them. You find that in the Mishnah, the idea of the temple's holiness and being pure when you came to the temple is now applied not simply to the temple sacred precincts, but it is applied to all of the nation, where people are required to observe the purity laws year round. If someone comes in contact with a menstruous woman, certain precautions are to be taken that, according to Leviticus, only apply to the temple. It doesn't apply when you are away from the temple. The second thing, and probably the most important thing, we're going to come back to this in a minute, is that a prohibition is placed on using the sacred name. Now, this was both a blessing and a curse, because prohibition of the sacred name caused it to be preserved. It caused it to not be profaned among the nations, and it caused it to not be made common among the nations. But at the same time, the refusal to use the name of Yahweh also held Israel captive, as David foretold in Psalms, which we will look at in a minute. And you find that the other thing they did is they confined how the Shabbat should be kept, where the Shabbat became a burden rather than delight. They also placed constraints on divorce and remarrying that were not in the law. And let me give you an example of one. In one teaching was that Rabbi Judah said that those who are married, that when they are betrothed, okay, it says they that had been married can be betrothed if only they be married. But then Rabbi Yosni says all women may be betrothed immediately after they become a widow because of her prescribed time of mourning. But you have all these debates very, very early in the Mishnah that place limits on the freedom of people. Some taught that women could not remarry for 3 months, but all of these people put guards around the Torah. They made it more narrow. They made it harder to obey. And there's not one single statute or judgment within the law that says a widowed woman cannot, or a divorced woman cannot remarry, although you find prohibitions against both in the Torah. As a matter of fact, you find that King David, as soon as Nabal died, Abigail took and married David as soon as he had died. It says that she hasted to hurry after David, and she married him right away. But you find that these instructions again are added, and all that they really do is they lead Israel into oppression. It's a self-inflicted oppression. The other thing that you find, there are instructions early in during this time. The rabbis invented 18 benedictions that Israel was supposed to be prayed throughout the day. These could not be interrupted for life or death. Now, many who follow this today, they just kind of pray it silently and keep it in mind. I mean, very piously and very, righteously. But in its early application within Judaism, this really took more the form of the modern Islamic call to prayer, where no matter what you are doing, when it came time for that benediction, you stopped, you dropped to your knees, and you prayed. And this was something that was very formal during the early Second Temple period. I mean, Yes, and the mission is very clear that it doesn't matter what you do. You stop and you say the Shema. You do all these things, by rote throughout the day, and it becomes a burden. It adds to the law and makes the law into something Jehovah did not intend it to do. And the Mishnah even says that even if a snake is twisted around your heel, you cannot interrupt your prayers. So you find that all of these rulings of men, all which Isaiah 27 and 28, he addresses these very, very profoundly, and he makes an example of these. And you find that all of these things do is that they lead us to bondage. They lead us away from Yahweh. And once again, echoing this call of the author of Lamentations, prophets, rabbis, pastors, teachers, priests, no one has found, and notice what he says. Doesn't say no one has found the political solution, no one has found the national policy that will take and change your hearts and minds. No, what the author says is no one has discovered your iniquity that holds you and blinds you and makes you captive and causes you to be banished. So I'm going to present to you today that this table is set before us to once again, we are at the crossroads where we can choose life and we can choose death. Um, we are at this place where this wine that poured to the nations of one of being one people runs very, very strong, and it sounds very pleasant. It sounds very, very lovely. Something that each of us thinks is absolutely a great way for this world to function. I in Ezekiel 32 verse 33, he says, "And lo, you are become to them a lovely song, and one that has a pleasant voice, that can play well on an instrument, for they will hear your words, but will not do them." So what you find is that we invent all these lovely, warm, cozy feeling songs that imbibe this idea of peace and social justice and law and order where we all get along. But the thing that it takes for us to do them, we refuse to do. Just like our forefathers, just like Israel before. We refuse to walk in the way that actually affects peace. So let me just share this wine and this is not Israel's wine per se. This is the wine that has been poured to all the nations of the earth. Um, and we embrace it because it feels so good. And really, here's one. In the 1960s, John Lennon made this ideal, the gentle ideal, sound so wonderful. This idea, Epiphany's long ago idea of making the world one people. Imagine there are no countries, it isn't hard to do, nothing to kill or die for, and no religion too. Imagine all the people living in peace. Imagine no possessions. Okay, again, this is the communist ideal here. I wonder if you can. No need for greed or hunger, a brotherhood of man. Imagine all the people sharing all the world. You may say, I'm a dreamer, I'm the only one. I hope someday you will join us and the world will live as one. Now, this sounds really good. It sounds like a very, very lovely song. But the way that they look to accomplish this is not through righteous judgments that bring life. Ezekiel 33:15 makes it clear it is the statutes or the judgments of Yahweh that bring life. You find that the way of this globalist Hellenistic idea is one that really only enables oligarchies. It enables the oppressors among society. 1985, we had the huge Farm Aid, where you had all these wonderful musicians come together. They, had this wonderful song, great collaborative effort, where they talk about we are the world, we are the children. And again, there's this idea that this whole world, can't we just live as one people? No religion to divide us, no national borders, no Americans, no French, no anybody, just be one people. But what they fail to tell you in this, what they failed, and I see I'm lagging. I'm going to stop here for a moment. Oh, conveniently, the this part isn't interrupted. Okay, I see that I'm back again. Hopefully, it doesn't time out for too long. But what you find and what is failed to be educated for society is that all of the farm aid activism, all of these activisms for world peace, guess what happened? The monies that were collected from several $1 million and the farm aid that was sent to Africa rotted on the docks. It was given to the leading factions, the oligarchies governing the totalitarian regimes. All of these efforts profited the dictators and the rulers, and it benefited the wicked among society. It did not benefit the average citizens, those who were starving, those who needed help. None of that got to them, but rather it only enriched the those with an agenda. And you find that over and over again, these well meaning intentions, these well meaning words that sound so good, so lovely, and so pleasant are reiterated over and over again. They are reiterated by preachers, by politicians, by the media. They are reiterated by everyone. The most pious among society echo this call. And you find that we have imbibed of this foreign wine. And today, in so many circles, we are once again told, just even this last week, Macron, I mean, you have France, where this idea that to be an individual nation is a bad thing. This idea to be separated by some sort of culture, to be separated by your religion is bad. What you find in Torah is that God's vision for the world is that every nation has its own borders. It talks about Egypt being restored and being a blessing. You find that each and every nation has its own culture, it has its individuality. The earth enjoys its diversity, but there's only one thing that unites the world. It isn't becoming one race or one people. What unites the world is a system of righteous judgments, a constitution that brings peace to each nation individually. And because each nation has that system of justice at work for them, then yes, it does bring us to be one people, but not one people in the sense of a melting and melting of cultures and identities, but of separate but very respected, because the Torah, again, is what gives us that liberty and that freedom. Now, today, this idea of one nation, of one people, has been taken to absurd lengths. Not only do you find there's this idea of no religion or one religion, no nationalities, no borders, but you now even have the idea that there are no men, no women, there are no genders. We are just one happy people. Um, so and at each step of the way, with each of these precepts, there are organizations, there are people that are profiting from these policies. Um, each step of the way, people profit by sin. Even within the medical community, people profit by there being sickness and disease. And as long as that is ongoing, the profit continues. So I have heard within, discussions over the years that in diaspora, we are not required to observe or keep the law. We should not, the Mosaic Code is only for the Holy Land, it's only for the land of Israel. But I would suggest that Israel's history demonstrates otherwise. When they failed to walk in the way, those holocausts didn't just occur on Israel's soil, it followed them into diaspora. The covenant that God made with Israel at Sinai, at Moab, and when the Second Temple remnant came and recovenanted under Ezra and Nehemiah, those covenants were made with a people and with their descendants. Whether those descendants recognize it or not, it is still there. It is still binding. So, how do we recover from our vain visions? How do we recover from the foolish things that hold us captive? How do we uncover the iniquity that leaves us persecuted and captive? And how do we reverse this hatred and solve this 2,000-year-old disease of anti Semitism? I'm going to submit that the answer today is the same as what it was in the days of Moses, the same as what it was during the Judges and Monarchy and Second Temple period. The world loves its own destructive ways. It loves to profit from the iniquity of the righteous. And again, industries benefit from it. Um, if the people are walking righteously, if we're doing what's right, there will be a lot of economic collapse because we won't need many of the services. We won't resort to those things because we will be in many ways self-sufficient. And what we find is that the nations, whether they want to or not, they just intuitively recognize the one thing that is capable of having salvation across the face of the earth. Isaiah 52, verse 15 says, He will sprinkle many nations, and kings shall shut their mouths. For that which they have not been told, they will see, and that which they have not heard, they will consider. And Ezekiel points out that in the latter days, we will finally understand that our forefathers were not innocent in all the ways that they were persecuted. And in Ezekiel 14, verse 23, he says, And they shall comfort you when they see your ways and your doings, and you shall know I have not done without cause in all that I have doing it, says Yahweh. So what is it that holds us captive, and why are we hated among the nations? And I will present to you that it is this, is that the nations, whether they want to admit it or not, somehow know that when Israel and Judah sanctify Yahweh, when they finally get it right and they walk in the covenant, and it says in Exodus 4:22 that Israel is Yahweh's firstborn son, meaning all the nations are his son, but Israel is simply the first to sanctify Yahweh, to walk in his covenant. When there is that righteous example, all those that profit from sin, they're going to fall. The economics that hold them up is going to be ripped out from underneath them. And they are going to be the dregs of society. So it is this, rather than wickedness and iniquity being exalted, righteousness will be exalted. And their power base will be lessened. But the nations know that when Israel and Judah have the supremacy as far as being a righteous people, not oppressing others, walking in the way of Yahweh, when that happens, and when there are no more Holocausts, that then their ways and their doings, they fall and they have to turn from their ways. So that is really that source of hatred. But as Ezekiel prophesied of a people coming and realizing that God has not done without cause, Deuteronomy 29, verses 24 through 28 also recognizes this. And he says, Even all nations shall say, why has Jehovah done this to the land? And what means uh, the greatness of his anger? Says in verse 25, then men shall say, because they have forsaken the covenant of Jehovah, the God of our fathers, which he made with them when he brought them out of the land of Egypt. So really this comes back. This forgetting the covenant has been the source of all of our conflict for the past 2,500 years. So, how do we recover from it? There are 4 steps that we can take to return to Yahweh, and for this horrific persecutions, this brother against brother, race against race, nation against nation. There are 4 things we can do to today that can change the course of world history. 4 things that we can do that will stop this broken record playing the same horrible song over and over and over again. Hosea 14, verse 1 and 2 gives us the first step. Israel, return to Yahweh your God, for you have fallen into your iniquity. Take with you words and turn to Yahweh and say to him, take away all our iniquity and receive us graciously, so will we render the calves of our lips. So the first step is to verbally acknowledge our iniquity. Don't hold back. Recognize that the ways we have sought, the ways our forefathers have sought, does not work. Isaiah 29, and this is really, really important. Isaiah 29, 23 through 24, and this is really kind of at the end of Isaiah's discourse against the traditions of the elders and teachers of Israel. Says, then shall they sanctify my name and sanctify the Holy One of Jacob, and shall fear Yahweh. And they that erred in spirit shall come to understanding, and they that murmured shall learn doctrine. So, number 2, the second step of the plan, sanctify the name of Yahweh. Now, David gives us a very, very poignant lesson in the importance of using and sanctifying Yahweh's name. Psalms 44, verses 20 through 24 states, if we have forgotten the name of our God, or stretched out our hands to strange gods, shall not Yahweh search this out? For he knows the secrets of the heart. Yes, for your sake we are killed all the day long. We are counted as sheep for slaughter. So notice David is directly associating the loss and the forgetting of the use of Yahweh's name with Israel and Judah being slaughtered all the day long. And then David says that it's kind of like this awakening. Awake, awake, why do you sleep, O Yahweh? Arise, cast us not out forever. Why do you hide your face from us and forget our affliction and our oppression? So this comes back to this age-old question of Lamentations 2:14. What is the iniquity that holds us captive? And again, it comes back to recognizing that we have erred. So first step, verbally acknowledge your iniquity. Second step, sanctify the name of Yahweh, use it. Yahweh has promised that he will blot out your sins and your transgressions as a cloud if we will but return to him. Now, Ezekiel builds on this in Ezekiel 36, verses 23 through 27. And he gives us let's see, am I missing here? I think I'm missing one step here. Um, oh, he gives us the third step. In Ezekiel 36, verses 23 through 27, and again, this echoes what Isaiah says. And I will sanctify my great name, which was profaned among the heathen, which you have profaned in the midst thereof. And you shall know that I am Yahweh, when I shall be sanctified in you. And really, it's in Israel's history that he sanctified before their eyes. For I will take you from among the heathen and gather you out of all countries, and I will bring you into your own land. There I will sprinkle clean water on you, and you will be clean from all your filthiness, and from your idols I will cleanse you. A new heart will I give to you, and a new spirit will I put within you, and I will take away your stony heart of flesh, and I will give you a heart of flesh, and I will put your spirit in you, and I will cause you to walk in my statutes, keep my judgments, and do them. So the third step is doing. So we have acknowledging, repenting, sanctifying the name of Yahweh, and we have doing, walking in the ways of Yahweh and doing them. So again, How do we return to Yahweh? How do we affect his salvation and avert future Holocaust, avert the anti-Semitism that is growing in Europe, growing in America, growing across the face of the earth? The answer is it's forsaking all of these ways that violate the covenant, returning to Yahweh. Talk is cheap. Saying that um, we will do it is cheap. So the only way to take this curse from off our necks is to sanctify the Sabbath, don't work in it, refrain from eating pork, do not commit adultery, worship Yahweh alone, and again refer to the entire covenant. And Joel, I'm gonna leave you with these two verses. Joel 2 verses 12 through 13. And I want to thank Anna who brought this to my attention this morning. We had talked briefly earlier today. It says, "And now, O Israel, says Yahweh, turn you everyone to me with your heart and with fasting and weeping and mourning. Rend your heart and not your garments. Turn unto Yahweh your God, for he will be gracious to you, slow to anger, and of great kindness, and he will repent of evil." And then Deuteronomy 10, verses 12 through 13. And this is why I say that the path of salvation, the way of Yahweh, is the same today as what it was 2,500 years ago. And this was Moses' words to Israel. "And now, O Israel, what does Yahweh your God require of you, but that you fear him and walk in his ways and love him and serve Yahweh, the God of your heart, with all your soul, to keep the commandments of Yahweh, to do his statutes, which I command you this day for your good." So it is returning to the good way, returning to the way of Yahweh and sanctify him alone. It is in forsaking additions to the law, forsaking our teachers, but returning to the way of Yahweh and walking in it alone. That peace can be found in the world, that social strife can be found. Now, the world may not live as one, but we will live as individual societies in peace, and we will grow in righteousness and understanding. Each of us having the joy and the rich history of our own culture and the way that God has led each of us individually. So I know I have given you guys a lot today. There is a lot of material. I know a lot of it is controversial. But I ask you to just read the text for yourself, pray, get out your Bible, look at those texts. I put them in the header above, and just compare those texts. Look for key words, key phrases where concepts are repeated. And and again, Proverbs says that you are blessed when you win souls. And the idea there is that the more people we talk to, the more people that we can increase the love of Torah, then the more that this vision of righteousness and truth will go across the face of the earth. So have a wonderful Shabbat. I'm going to stick around for a few minutes for any questions or comments, but I'm going to say have a wonderful day and Shabbat Shalom.